The rain had not stopped in 4 days. It came down in thick, warm sheets across the Ardenvale frontier, the kind of rain that turned dry creek beds into rushing brown rivers and swallowed hollow ground whole. The trees here were old and enormous, their roots tangled above the soil like fingers gripping the earth. The canopy was so dense that even in daylight the forest floor sat in deep shadow. Somewhere in that shadow, a man named Gregor moved without sound. He was not young, he was not built like a soldier. His boots were patched at the toe, his jacket had seen 10 seasons of hard use, and the pack on his back held field medic tools, dried rations, and 3 small creatures that should not have survived the night before. He had found them at the edge of the South Creek 2 mornings back. The water had risen fast and without warning, the kind of surge that took everything sitting low to the ground. The nest hollow had been full of soft mud and still water when he reached it. He had nearly walked past. Then he heard a sound, faint, wet, a clicking like a small stone tapping glass. He had dug with his hands. 3 of them scaled, reptilian. Their wing buds were sealed flat against their bodies, their claws no bigger than his thumbnail. They were cold in the specific way that means a living thing is almost not living anymore. He knew what they were. Every ranger on the Ardenvale frontier knew what Vorath hatchlings looked like. Every ranger also knew what the Red Dragon Pack did to trespassers in their territory. Gregor had looked at the 3 small bodies in his hands. Then he had opened his jacket and tucked them against his chest. That was 47 hours ago. He had tried twice to move south toward the colony relay point, but the rain came back harder both times, and the smallest hatchling had started shaking in a way he did not like. Moving them through another surge was a risk he was not willing to take. So he had built shelter. He had made fire low enough to give heat without smoke. He had used his medic kit to clean a small cut on the foreleg of the middle one, a clean wound, probably from the rocks in the creek, and bound it with cloth and plant resin. He had rationed his own food and crushed half of it into paste because he did not know what hatchlings could eat, and something was better than nothing, and they had eaten it. They were warmer now, calmer. They slept against him in shifts, clicking softly in their sleep. He had set a patrol pattern around the camp each dusk and each dawn, wide circles, reading the ground, checking for track signs. He was in Vorath lands, he knew it. He had not wandered in by accident. He had followed the creek specifically because it was the fastest route back after the storm redirected him, and he had made his peace with the fact that the pack might find him before the rain stopped. What he could do was make sure that when they arrived, he was not running. He was sitting beside the low fire on the 3rd evening when the forest went quiet. Not the quiet of rain stopping, the rain was still falling. This was a different silence, the kind where every creature in the understory stops moving at the same moment because something at the top of the food chain has entered the area. Gregor felt it before he heard anything, a pressure in the air, a change in weight. He did not stand up. He did not reach for the short blade at his belt. He set his hands flat on his knees, palms down, and he looked at the door of the shelter. The hatchlings stirred. The smallest one made a low clicking sound and pushed its nose harder into the fold of his jacket. Outside, something very large placed a foot on wet ground with the patience of a creature that had never needed to hurry. Then another step. Then the shelter door came apart in one pull, and the cold air rushed in, and the firelight fell across the massive armored frame of a Vorath Alpha standing at full height, gold eyes burning in the dark, breath coming out in slow white clouds, one clawed hand still gripping the door frame hard enough to crack it. Behind him, shapes in the dark, 7, 8 Mori. The Alpha looked down at the human sitting, cross-legged, on the shelter floor. Then his eyes moved to the hatchlings. The forest was absolutely still. Gregor did not speak. He did not move. He turned his hands slowly, palms up, fingers open and spread wide, and he held them out to the sides of his body where they could be seen clearly. 3 Vorath hatchlings slept on his chest. The Alpha did not move for a long time. Then from somewhere behind him in the dark came a sound, low and rough, like a word being dragged out of old stone. One of the other hunters had recognized the hatchlings, then another sound, then another. The Alpha stepped forward into the shelter. Gregor did not flinch. The golden eyes moved from the hatchlings to the human's face, to the open palms and back again. Slow, deliberate, reading every detail. Outside, none of the pack spoke. The rain kept falling. The Alpha's name was Drav, and he had never been uncertain in his life. He was the largest of the Red Dragon pack, the one who had earned the Alpha mark by surviving 3 challenge fights before the age of full-scale growth. His clan had held the Ardenvale Deep Forest for 6 generations. He had tracked prey across flooded plains, through volcanic fog, and once across the frozen upper ridge of the northern range in the dead of the cold season. He had never failed to find what he hunted. He had been certain about this hunt too. A human had crossed into Vorath lands, a single human, soft-bodied, unarmed by nature, with no pack and no territory instinct. It would be over quickly. He would take the creature alive and walk it to the colony boundary as a message. Simple, clean. Then he had pulled the shelter door open, and the world had rearranged itself. He stood in the entrance and looked at the 3 hatchlings sleeping on the human's chest, and for the first time in his adult life, Drav did not know what to do with the next 5 seconds. Behind him, Sora, his second, had gone absolutely rigid. He heard Ruck inhale sharply. Even Bale, who had not been quiet about wanting this hunt over fast, said nothing. The entire pack stood in the rain and stared. The hatchlings were from the Storm Clutch. 11 days ago, the nest hollow had flooded overnight. By the time the pack found it, there was nothing, no eggs, no young, no tracks leading out. The flood had swallowed everything. They had performed the loss rites 2 nights later. And here they were, alive, warm, tucked inside a human's jacket like it was the most natural thing in the world. The smallest one, the one Drav had privately already named, though he would never have admitted it, shifted in its sleep and made the soft 2-click sound that hatchlings made when they were comfortable and safe. The human had not moved. His palms were still open. His breathing was slow and controlled. His eyes were on Drav's face, not on the weapons. Drav had hunted enough prey to know the difference between an animal pretending to be calm and an animal that actually was. This human was actually calm. That was strange. That was very strange. Drav stepped fully into the shelter. He crouched, a deliberate motion, bringing himself down to the human's level, and looked at the hatchlings one by one. He checked their breathing. He checked their scale color. He examined the small bandage on the middle one's foreleg, touching the edge of it lightly with one claw. The cloth was clean. The wound beneath, when he lifted a corner, was clean too, sealed properly. No heat in the surrounding scale, which meant no infection. Someone had known what they were doing. He looked at the human. The human said something in the colony trade tongue. His voice was low and even. I found them in the mud at the South Creek. They were cold. I did not know who they belonged to. I have been trying to keep them warm. Drav understood trade tongue. Most of the pack did, at least enough to manage border disputes and the occasional supply crossing. He understood every word the human had said. He turned and looked at Sora, who had moved into the shelter doorway. She had understood too. Her expression was unreadable in the way it got when she was processing something that did not fit any existing category. Drav stood and stepped back. He gestured to Ruck and Bale. Ruck came forward, crouching beside the human, and held out both forearms, the Vorath way of asking to receive something precious. The human looked at Ruck's face, then down at the hatchlings, and then, with very careful hands, he began to transfer them, one at a time, slowly, making sure each one was settled before moving to the next. Ruck received each hatchling with both hands, tucked them against his chest, and checked them again with his nose, the deep centroid that Vorath used to assess a young one's health. He passed them to Bale, who did the same. The smallest one woke during the transfer. It blinked its amber eyes, looked around at the large armored faces surrounding it, and then looked back at the human. It made a small, confused sound. The human held out 2 fingers. The hatchling reached out and gripped them. Bale stopped breathing for a moment. Ruck pulled the cloth bandage fully free from the middle hatchling's foreleg and held it up. He turned it over. He sniffed the resin on it. His eyes moved to the human's medic pack sitting open beside the fire, and then back to the hatchling's clean, sealed wound. Whatever Ruck had expected to find when this hunt ended, it was not this. Drav looked at the shelter. He looked at the carefully stacked firewood, the low flame, the rationed food. He looked at the patrol marks in the mud just outside the door, wide circles, deliberately spaced, the kind of pattern a creature walked when it was watching for threats. The human had been guarding the perimeter, every night, in Vorath territory, alone. He looked at the human one more time. The human met his eyes and waited. Outside, the rain fell, and the red dragon pack stood in it without speaking, holding their living hatchlings, and none of them had a single word for what they were looking at. They brought him outside. Not roughly, not with blades drawn. Drav simply stepped out of the shelter and looked back once, and Gregor understood that he was meant to follow, so he did. The rain had eased to a thin drizzle. The pack had spread into a loose half-circle in the small clearing outside the shelter. 8 hunters, all of them tall, all of them armored in natural scale, that caught the firelight through the shelter's open door. Gregor walked to the center of that half-circle and stood still. He had made a decision years ago, early in his ranger work, about how to behave when a situation was already past the point where running helped. The decision was simple: be exactly what you were completely, without apology or performance. Prey ran, prey cowered. Prey made itself small and hoped the thing looking at it would lose interest. He was not prey. He was a man standing in a forest, answerable for his choices, and his choices had been correct. He stood straight and waited. Drav spoke. The Vorath language was deep and layered, clicks inside longer sounds, resonance in the chest cavity. Sora stepped forward and translated into trade tongue, her voice flat and careful. You were in Vorath lands. You knew this. Yes, Gregor said. You found the young and kept them. Yes. You could have left them and moved to your colony. Gregor considered the question the way he considered all questions, honestly. I tried to move south with them on the second day. The rain came back, and the smallest one started shaking. Moving them through another surge was more risk than staying, so I stayed. Sora translated. Drav listened. His expression did not change. Then Sora asked something that was not a translation. It was her own question, and Gregor could tell the difference because her tone shifted slightly. You could have left them behind when you decided not to move, set them somewhere dry, left food, gone alone. They were cold, Gregor said. A dry spot and some food is not enough when they are that cold. They needed body heat. I was the only source available. He did not say it like a hero. He said it the way someone explains a practical problem and its practical solution. Sora stared at him for a moment before translating. Ruck had set the hatchlings down in a dry hollow between 2 roots, and now he crouched beside the middle one, studying the foreleg wound again in the better light. He pulled out the cloth bandage that he had removed inside the shelter. He had kept it, apparently, and he was turning it over in his clawed hands, examining the resin work on it. He said something in Vorath without looking up. Sora said, he wants to know where you learned to treat a scale wound. I did not know it was a scale wound specifically, Gregor said. I cleaned it and closed it the same way I would close any cut that size. Clean the debris out, check for heat, apply a sealant that will hold in wet conditions. The resin is from a plant about 200 meters north. It has the right properties. Sora translated. Ruck listened. Then Ruck stood, walked to Gregor, and held the bandage out to him. Gregor took it. Then Ruck reached into the pack at his side and placed something at Gregor's feet. A strip of dried meat, dark and dense, Vorath trail ration. He placed it deliberately, squarely, and stepped back. Bale made a sharp sound. Ruck turned his head and looked at Bale with the kind of steadiness that was its own answer. Bale looked away. Gregor understood what the meat meant, or at least he understood enough. He had read everything the colony's Xenology office had published on Vorath pack behavior before taking his frontier posting. When the Vorath owed a debt, they paid it in kind. Ruck was not being friendly, he was being precise. The human had fed their young. The pack would feed the human. Anything else would be an imbalance, and the Vorath found imbalance deeply offensive. Gregor crouched and picked up the strip of meat and put it in his jacket pocket. Drav had been watching all of this without speaking. Now he spoke again, and Sora translated, "You walked patrol around your camp every night." "Yes, alone in Vorath territory with our young. Someone had to watch the perimeter." A pause. Sora translated. Drav looked at him. "You expected us to come," Drav said through Sora. "I expected someone to come eventually," Gregor said. "Either your pack or something else that smelled the hatchlings. I wanted to know which one was coming and from which direction before it arrived." Drav was quiet for a long time. The drizzle came down. Then he said something to the pack, not to Gregor, and whatever it was caused Bale to look at the ground and Ruck to make a sound of quiet agreement and Sora to fold her arms and nod once, slowly. The hatchlings had fallen back asleep in the root hollow. The smallest one had its nose pointed in Gregor's direction even in sleep, like a compass. Drav looked at it. Then he looked at Gregor. He did not say anything else, not yet, but the way he looked had changed in a way Gregor could not fully name, like a door that had not opened but was no longer locked. The pack would make camp here tonight. That at least was clear. The pack built their own fire 10 meters from Gregor's shelter. It was larger than his. The Vorath ran hot and preferred high flames, and they arranged themselves around it in the specific formation that their kind used when holding temporary ground rather than claiming it. Gregor knew the difference. He had studied it. Holding ground meant they did not consider this a permanent situation. It meant the judgment was still open. He sat at the edge of his own small fire and ate half of his remaining rations and listened to the pack argue. He could not understand the words, but he had spent enough years on the frontier to read the shape of a disagreement. Bale was loud and gestured often. Ruck was quiet and did not move much, which in Vorath terms meant he was the more certain of the two. The other hunters listened and said little. Drav sat apart from all of them and stared at the fire and said nothing at all. Sora was not arguing. She was sitting at the edge of the pack's fire with her back slightly angled away from the group, and she was watching Gregor. He was aware of it. He did not look back directly. He finished eating, checked his medic kit, took inventory of what he had used and what remained, and then sat with his hands wrapped around his water container and looked at the trees. After a while, Sora stood and walked over. She crouched on the other side of his fire, not close, but close enough to speak quietly. She was studying him the way he imagined she studied terrain before a hunt, methodical, looking for the things that were inconsistent. She said in trade tongue, "When we came through the door, you were afraid." It was not a question. "Yes," Gregor said. "How do you know you were afraid?" He thought about it. "My hands went cold, my hearing got sharper, my body wanted to stand up and back against the wall." "But you did not." "No." Sora was quiet for a moment. Then, "Why?" Gregor looked at the fire. The honest answer was the only answer worth giving, so he gave it. Because standing up and backing against the wall would have made things worse. Prey runs. Prey makes itself small. I'm not prey, and I did not want to teach your pack to see me that way in the first meeting. Sora was still for a long time. "You thought about this before we arrived," she said. "I thought about it while I was walking patrol," he said. "I had 3 nights to think about what I would do when you found me. And you decided not to run. I decided I would sit still and show you my hands and let the hatchlings speak for what I had been doing. They were the evidence. I just had to make sure I did not do anything stupid before you had a chance to look at them." Sora looked back at the pack's fire. The argument was still going, Bale's voice rising and falling in sharp peaks. She watched it for a moment, then turned back to Gregor. "Bale says the trespass law does not bend," she said. "He says a debt of the young does not cancel a boundary violation. He is not wrong about our law." "I know," Gregor said. "That does not concern you." Gregor was quiet. then, honestly, it concerns me, but I would make the same choice again. Laws exist for reasons. The reason behind your boundary law is to protect what is yours. I protected what was yours. I cannot argue the law better than Bale can, but the reason behind the law is on my side, and I think your alpha is smart enough to know that. Sora looked at him. Something shifted behind her eyes, a small recalibration, the kind a thinker makes when a piece fits somewhere unexpected. She went back to the pack fire without another word. Gregor watched her go. He watched her sit beside Drav and speak to him quietly, close, not translating for the group, but speaking only to the alpha. Drav listened without turning his head. At the end of whatever she said, he made a single low sound. Bale went quiet. The argument did not resume. Sometime later, the hatchlings woke and became restless in the root hollow. The pack tended to them, feeding them from their own rations, checking temperatures, speaking to them in the soft clicking language that Vorath used for their young. But the smallest one kept pulling toward the direction of Gregor's fire, and eventually Bale, who had been the one watching it, made a sound of clear disgust and looked away, and the hatchling covered the distance in a clumsy scramble and climbed into Gregor's lap. Gregor looked down at it. It looked up at him, made the two-click comfort sound, settled. He put one hand gently over its back, enough warmth, not restraint, and did not move. Across both fires, every member of the Red Dragon pack saw it. Drav stared at the small shape on the human's lap for a long time. He did not order it brought back. He turned back to his own fire and sat with his thoughts, and the forest pressed in dark and quiet around all of them, and the rain had finally, fully stopped. Above the canopy, for the first time in 4 days, there were stars. Dawn came grey and slow over Ardenvale. The birds started first, the high canopy ones that always woke before the light reached the floor. Then the light came down in thin columns through the wet leaves, and the forest smelled like earth and bark and cold water, and Gregor woke with the smallest hatchling still tucked under his arm, and the full Red Dragon pack watching him from across the clearing. He sat up, the hatchling clicked, annoyed at being disturbed, and then curled tighter against his side. Gregor looked at the pack looked at him. Drav stood. Every member of the pack went still when the alpha rose. Even the hatchlings, who had been restless in the root hollow, went quiet. Drav walked around the dead remains of the night's fire and crossed the clearing and stood in front of Gregor at full height. Gregor stood up to meet him. He did not have to. Drav was a full head and a half taller, plus the crest. Standing did not close that gap in any physical way, but he stood because he was not going to receive whatever this was from the ground. Drav looked at him for a long moment. Then he spoke, and this time he spoke to Gregor directly, not to Sora, not to the pack, but to the human standing in front of him, and Sora translated from 2 steps behind without being asked, her voice steady. You trespassed. This is a fact that does not go away. My pack's law is not a suggestion. The boundary exists for reasons that were decided before my father's father, and it will exist after I am gone. You knew the line, and you crossed it. Gregor said nothing. Drav continued. You also found the young of my pack in the mud of a flooded creek, and you did not leave them. You carried them. You kept them warm with your own body. You cleaned one of their wounds. You walked patrol around them in the dark in territory that is mine, and you did it knowing what would happen when I arrived. And you stayed anyway. A pause. Sora's voice did not waver. Among my people, there is a word for someone who guards the young of another when their own kind cannot. It is not a word of friendship. It is a word of function. It means that this being stood between what was ours and what could have harmed it, at cost to itself, without being asked. Drav reached to his belt. We do not have this word in trade tongue. I am told you do not have it in yours either. What we have instead is what I am about to do. He drew the short blade from his belt. It was not a weapon, or not only that. It was the Alpha's ceremonial fang, the blade that the Red Dragon Pack Alpha carried to mark binding decisions. The pack straightened. Ruck put his fist over his chest. Even Bale did not look away. Drav turned the blade sideways, flat face outward, and pressed it to Gregor's left forearm. Not a cut, not a threat. Contact. the cold flat of the metal against his jacket's sleeve for exactly 3 seconds. Then Drav spoke one word in Vorath. Sora said, "Warden." Gregor kept his eyes on Drav's face. Sora continued translating, though Drav had already stepped back. "It means your trespass is answered. It means the pack's debt to you is recorded. It means that if you walk in these woods, you walk with a name the Red Dragon Pack will recognize. No hunter will raise a weapon against you without first raising it against that name. This is not mercy, it is the correct accounting." The forest was very quiet. Gregor thought about what to say. He could have said thank you, but that was not quite right for what this was. He could have said nothing, but that would have been wrong too. He thought about the 3 hatchlings in the mud, about the 4 days of rain, about walking the perimeter in the dark with his torch off so he could hear better, about the weight of small warm bodies against his chest. He said, "I would do it again." Sora translated it. Drav looked at him for a long moment. Then he made a sound from the back of his chest, low, single, final, that was not a word in any language Gregor knew. But Sora's expression when she heard it told him something. She looked like a person who has just seen a thing she was not sure she believed in until right now. The pack moved to collect the hatchlings for the journey home. One by one, the young were settled in carrying warmth wraps that 2 of the hunters had been holding in their packs this whole time. The pack had come prepared to bring the young home if found alive. They made soft sounds as they were picked up. The 2 larger ones went easily. The smallest one was in Gregor's arms. It gripped his finger. He held still and let it hold on for as long as it needed to. When it finally let go and was lifted away, Gregor lowered his hand and looked at the empty clearing where the pack had been camped. Boot prints, claw marks, 2 fire pits, the crushed grass where large bodies had slept. Sora was the last one still standing there. She said, "What will you tell your colony?" "The truth," Gregor said. "I found hatchlings in the mud, and I kept them warm until their pack came." She looked at him for a moment. "That is all you will say?" "That is what happened." She turned and walked into the trees. The forest took the pack back silently, the way forests take things they know how to hold. Gregor stood in the empty clearing and listened until the last footfall sound was gone. Then he looked down at his forearm, where the cold flat of the alpha blade had pressed. He picked up his pack. He checked his rations. He oriented south toward the colony relay point and started walking. The sun was coming up properly now, cutting through the canopy in long, warm lines. It was a good morning to be walking. The colony director's name was Ophia, and she had been managing the Ardenvale frontier settlement for 9 years without a single incident with the Red Dragon Pack. She intended to keep that record. So when Gregor Hale walked through the relay station door 6 days after he had gone missing in a storm, alive and apparently unbothered, she sat him down across her desk with a cup of something hot, and she asked him to tell her exactly what had happened, slowly, with no parts left out. He told her. When he was done, she looked at him for a long time. Then she looked at his incident report, which he had already filed in his usual way, flat, factual, chronological. 3 juvenile Vorath recovered from flooded nesting site, provided emergency shelter, warmth, and basic wound care, returned to parent pack upon contact, no hostile engagement, condition of hatchlings upon return, good. She read it again. "You were in their territory for 4 days, she said. "Yes, with their young. Yes, and the Alpha gave you a warden mark." That is what Sora said the word meant. Ophia put the report down and looked at the wall for a moment in the way she sometimes did when she was adding up a column of numbers that was coming out to something unexpected. She had done extensive reading on Vorath pack hierarchy before taking this posting. She knew what the warden designation was. She also knew it had never, in any recorded contact between the Vorath and any other species on Ardenvale, been given to an outsider. She picked the report back up. "I'm going to need to send this to the territorial office." "I expected that," Gregor said. "They will have questions. Tell them to put them in writing. I am going back out next week. The South Ridge needs a survey after the storm damage. She stared at him. Gregor, you were just in Vorath territory for 4 days. Yes, he said, standing up and taking his pack. And I know their ground better now. It will make the survey easier. He left. Ophir sent the report to the territorial office. The territorial office sent it to the interspecies liaison division. The liaison division sat on it for 2 days, then forwarded it to the xenology team with a note that said, essentially, please confirm this is not a translation error. The xenology team confirmed it was not. The liaison division then sent a very careful formal inquiry to the Vorath border contact, a slow process that required a neutral courier and 3 days of travel each way. The response from the Red Dragon Pack came back in 11 days. It was short. Sora had written it, or at least translated it, because the hand was neat and the trade tongue was precise. It said, the accounting is correct. The human called Gregor holds warden name under the Red Dragon Pack. Those who deal with him deal with us. This is final. The liaison division forwarded this to the colonial governor. The colonial governor forwarded it to the interspecies council. The council called an emergency session. Meanwhile, on the South Ridge, Gregor was measuring flood damage and recording which tree species had survived the surge best. He had a good sample size. The storm had been thorough. On his 4th day back in the field, he found a Vorath border marker that had been moved. Not forward, it was not a territorial expansion. It had been repositioned at an angle, rerouted, creating a clear corridor around the area where his shelter had been and extending in a wide arc south toward his usual survey route. He stopped and looked at it for a while. The carving on it was fresh. He took out his field notebook and sketched the new marker position and its carvings. He noted the date and the coordinates. He wrote, Vorath boundary adjustment, non-aggressive, appears to establish passage corridor around Ranger Station site. Purpose, protection, not expansion, filed for colonial records. He closed the notebook and kept walking. On the frontier worlds, news of the Red Dragon Pack incident spread through the interspecies communications network the way unusual things always spread slowly at first, then all at once. The Tavari heard it and sent a query to their liaison contact asking whether the details were accurate. The Hun Collective discussed it in 3 consecutive session cycles. A Vorath pack had given warden status to a human, a single human, a ranger. Not a diplomat, not a general, not someone whose job it was to negotiate with anyone. A man who walked in the rain and carried a medic kit and had found 3 cold hatchlings in the mud. The general consensus among the non-human species of the Ardenvale network, delivered with varying degrees of reluctance, was that this was either a very unusual human or a very usual one. The debate was still ongoing. On a morning 6 weeks after the storm, Gregor returned to his ranger station to find something hanging on the outside of his door. A small carved token, dark wood, smooth, with a shape pressed into it that he recognized from the xenology files as a hatchling mark. The kind, a Vorath pack placed on something they considered under their keeping. He did not know when it had been placed there. He had been out for 4 days, and it had not been there when he left. He unhooked it carefully, went inside, hung it above his workbench next to his field medic kit between the survey maps and the window. It caught the morning light. He made himself something to eat, checked his gear for the next survey run, and did not think of himself as remarkable in any way because he was not. He was a man who had done the correct thing in a wet forest at the right time. That was all. Somewhere in the deep Ardenvale woods, a small hatchling with a healing cut on its foreleg slept warm inside a pack den, and occasionally made the 2-click sound in its sleep that meant safe and comfortable and here. Some things do not need a grand explanation. They just need to be true.